Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Somewhat Scholarly. My name is Alan Hibbard, and today we are exploring the question, is Bitcoin bad for the environment? Very important question. Is it bad for the environment? But first, I want to wish you guys a happy Halloween. And since it's Halloween, you know what that means. It is Bitcoin White Paper Day. So it was 12 years ago today that the Bitcoin White Paper came out, so happy anniversary. Actually, in my next video for next week, I am going to explore the question, is Bitcoin actually like its white paper? Because we've seen Bitcoin Cash, BSV, Bitcoin Gold, and a few others, as well as things that don't even have Bitcoin in the title that are claiming to be more like the original Bitcoin white paper than Bitcoin. So we'll explore that next week. So if you want to see that, make sure you subscribe. All right. Is Bitcoin bad for the environment? Here's the argument in standard form as I sort of hear most people make it or imply it. Number one, Bitcoin uses energy. 2, using energy emits CO2. 3, CO2 is bad for the environment. Therefore, 4, Bitcoin is bad for the environment. Okay, and when you present it like this, it's like, okay, that sounds pretty compelling. Okay, but is it true, right? Do we agree? Well, Bitcoin uses energy. Yeah, I agree with that. Using energy emits CO2. Yeah, I mean, like if you're burning hydrocarbons, yeah, for sure. Other kinds of energy, not necessarily. Some clean energies, obviously, nuclear. But we can sort of assume that's sort of not the main point here. I guess some of the energy used to power Bitcoin emits CO2. That's sort of like the idea here. So fine, let's say agree. CO2 is bad for the environment. Yikes. I have no idea. Guys, I got to admit, long before Bitcoin was even invented, before the white paper, Halloween 2008, climate change was a topic out there that people discussed. And I've been thinking about it for a long time, 10, 15 years. I mean, a long time. I still don't know. I still don't know if CO2 is bad for the environment. I've read plenty of literature for and against. I just don't know. So anyways, if you clicked on this video expecting a definitive answer, yes or no, I am sorry to disappoint you, but I don't have one, right? But I do have a lot of ways of thinking about this, and that's the point of the video, is to share those ways with you. So maybe you're going to like some of the ways I think, maybe you're going to not like some of the ways I think, and I encourage your active participation in the comment section. This video, more than any other one I've ever made, I really want to hear what you have to say. Big time. And it's in that spirit that I decided to number all these things. You'll notice a number on every single thing I'm talking about. That's to make it easier for you to reference certain ideas and comments in the comment section, right? So if you want to talk about number 9, modeling, just say 9, in regards to number 9. Okay? Anyways. So I have no idea if CO2 is bad for the environment. So maybe you have an answer. I mean, I sort of doubt that anyone can just know that because there are too many complicated things we have to discuss. And that's what we're going to do in the remainder of the video. So first of all, starting with number 5, I feel like it's Star Wars, right? Episode 4. Certain factors we have to consider. Definitions. This is so important. People just use words and they assume that everyone knows what they mean with each word, and they also assume it's the only way to define that word. And we saw this with decentralized versus centralized, as well as concentrated versus not concentrated, and plenty of other things in previous videos. So let me just give you an example. Definitions. Bitcoin is bad for the environment. First one that comes to mind is bad. What do we mean by bad? Like everyone thinks I know. Obviously, I know what bad means. Like it's bad, but what do you mean? Like you got to define it. It's actually really hard. I would encourage you to pause the video and write out a definition for bad. Like write it out. Don't Google it. Don't open a separate tab and let someone else define it for you. Actually think about it. How would you define bad? It's actually not that obvious, and it's not that easy. And whatever you write is going to be different than what I write. It's going to be different than what somebody else writes, and it's going to be different than what's on Google. So it's actually not as obvious as it sounds. So I encourage you to try it. Number 2, environment. What do we mean by environment? Are we talking about temperature? Are we talking about sea level? Are we talking about the number of forest fires, hurricanes, all of it combined? I mean, like, and if so, where does it end? Like, you can't just say everything. Well, everything's the environment. Like what? Like the light bulb in this room? Is that the environment? You know, you got to define it. It's actually really hard. Again, if you want, you can pause the video. It might get a little redundant, but anyways. And third, in the spirit of definitions, you guys are going to think I'm kidding and that I'm like somehow trolling you, but I'm very serious. So hear me on this one. Is. Okay, I know it sounds ridiculous. Is. What do you mean by is? Okay, hear me out. If Bitcoin is, if it is bad right now, or just energy use, or anything, right? If something is bad right now, present tense, if it is bad right now, we should be able to point to the bad and say, that's the thing going on right now that's bad. I see it. Look, there's the bad. We should be able to point to it. That's very different than Bitcoin will be bad. Because will be is future tense. So that would imply, okay, we can't see the bad right now, but eventually we'll be able to see the bad. And if you're going to say that Bitcoin will be bad for the environment, or energy use will be bad, but it's not bad now, but it will be, then you've got to somehow define the threshold at which it becomes bad, which is a very difficult thing to do. If you say like, okay, when the world explodes, when it just, you know, then it's bad. Then it's too late. So anyways, it's something to think about. I think it's very important because when Bitcoin started, January 2009, was that energy use bad? It was like one laptop, right? I'm using a laptop right now to record this. Is that bad? Is that energy use bad? Was the first laptop that mined Bitcoin bad? What about the second one? The third one? I mean, at what point did it become bad? You know, so if it is bad now, you know, was it past tense always bad? Anyways, something to think about. So that's definitions. As you can see, that right there is enough to put this whole argument, you know, at a dead standstill, like complete gridlock. So anyways, I'm not going to take as much time to go through all the others, but they're really important to think about, and people just brush over them, and because thinking takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy. I'm often reminded of a quote by Henry Ford: thinking is the hardest work there is. That's why so few people do it. So I would encourage you to spend some energy, thinking. I think it's energy well spent. Anyways, moving on. Number 6, trade-offs. There's pros and cons. There's opportunity costs. If we do one thing, we can't do something else. If we get a short-term benefit, it might come at a long-term cost, and so forth. So many things where people say, oh, we should do this, or we shouldn't do this, or this social policy, or this political agenda, or da-da-da-da-da. Should not. Very, very rarely are trade-offs even acknowledged, much less discussed or debated or talked about. I mean, you got to acknowledge that there are trade-offs to absolutely everything you're doing. There's always trade-offs. There's always trade-offs. Number 7, subjectivity, right? Once we acknowledge the trade-offs and we say, you know, we define things like good and bad and so forth, when we make an ultimate value judgment, like, okay, these are the trade-offs, these are the pros, these are the cons, I think the pros are stronger, so I'm going to go for it, whatever that thing is. And you might say, well, I think the cons are stronger, so I'm not going to go for it. That's okay. I mean, we're both making subjective judgments. Like, value judgments are subjective. It's up to each person. We're never going to agree on the exact value of anything. Never. It's just the way it is. So it's important to keep that in mind, that, you know, value is subjective. Estimation. I started doing some research on forests, like deforestation, and the effect it has on killing different species, like birds, for example, that live in those forests. And I read a whole bunch of different articles, including some articles like that aggregated different things, and they cite different estimates by experts. Some experts think that, you know, 90% of species are extinct, and this and that, and estimates vary so widely they almost include every single number that exists, like from 0% to 100% and everything in between. For these enormous issues, estimates vary so widely, it's comical. I mean, it takes the nature of an expert and really I think undermines the whole nature of what an expert is. I mean, their views are so different from one another, and you can find one that says anything or thinks anything, and it's just crazy. Estimates are so bananas, and yet all of these projections, models, expectations, they're all based on estimates. So many of the variables that go into the models are estimates. You know, you might have one or two that you measure, and then you estimate that the trend continues, or the trend strengthens, or the trend weakens. These estimates are just nuts. Modeling. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. I heard Nassim Nicholas Taleb say that. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. I totally agree. And as a data scientist, I've made a lot of models in my day. Experts. Okay, I commented on experts. But the one thing I'll say about experts is that you can go back and look at their track record. I recommend this book right here, The Ultimate Resource by Julian Simon. Holy cow. He not only turns a bunch of conventional wisdom on its head using data, but he also goes through what a lot of experts have been predicting since the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And in every generation, in every presidential administration, there's the climate expert who thinks we only have 20 more years before we destroy the climate. And there's the energy expert who thinks we're going to run out of energy in 20 years. And then there's the food expert who thinks we're going to have a food shortage in 15 years. And then there's this expert, and they're almost always wrong. I mean, like almost 100% of the time, they're wrong. They're often wrong in the direction. Like they think it's going up and it actually goes down, or vice versa. And very often the magnitude. They're off by a factor of 10, a factor of 100. I mean, like, it's really, really, really crazy. So if you're interested in how have these experts done over time, I encourage you to go back. Go Google whatever you care about. Climate change, food shortages, famines and so forth, natural disasters, whatever. Go Google, find the predictions that were made in the 60s and see who made them. Who were the leading experts at the time? And then were they right or were they wrong? I mean, in almost every case, you're going to find that these people were wrong, regardless of their political views or anything else. Number 11, problems versus symptoms. You go to the doctor. Oh, doc, I have back pain. He might prescribe something for back pain. And then he takes your blood pressure. Oh, you got high blood pressure. Oh, here's something for your high blood pressure. And then, something else. Our healthcare industry, which we might call sick care, it's so focused on symptom management. It's like my back pain is a symptom. Maybe the problem is you're sitting in a bad chair, or maybe your mattress is the problem. But since you have back pain, your doctor prescribes something for back pain, and you haven't addressed the underlying problem, which is the chair or the mattress or something like that. And then, you have high blood pressure. Maybe the real problem is you're eating a certain food, or you're not eating a certain food, but the doctor doesn't say, you should start eating avocados or whatever. The doctor says, here, take this pill, and then it'll lower your blood pressure, right? There's all this emphasis on just tweaking the symptoms and just addressing the symptoms, and it's important to do a root cause analysis and say, what is causing those symptoms, and then how do we address the underlying problem? So that's an important thing to think about as you think of social policies, climate change, and so forth. Root cause analysis. Are you actually looking at a symptom, or are you really looking at the problem that's causing the symptoms? Cure versus disease. I gotta be careful what I say here, but there are a lot of things lately that are going on where people are implementing a cure for a problem that is way worse than the disease, right? It's like if you have high blood pressure, that doesn't really hurt you, potentially. Maybe you don't feel any pain, your doctor just noticed, and then you take all these pills that give you headaches and nausea and whatever else just to lower the blood pressure. And the cure is worse than the disease. And there's not enough discussion of that in my mind with anything in the world. Number 13, emotions. Everything we do is for our emotions. Even when we think rationally, even when we put arguments in standard form and we intellectualize and we analyze and we reason and we do all these things, the reason we're doing that is for our emotions. We want to feel like we've thought about it adequately. We want to feel competent. We want to feel confident. We want to feel all these different things. Everything we do is for our emotions. Some people let their emotions get out of control. Some people, dismiss the fact that they have emotions. It's just an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, so those are different factors we want to consider. Let's keep going through different biases. These are cognitive biases. They get in the way of thinking clearly, and it's just because of how humans are wired. So it's very important to be aware of them. Just because you're aware of them doesn't mean you magically prevent them from happening. You've got to really stay on top of them. And by the way, this list of factors, this list of biases, they're not exhaustive lists. I could have made them 10 times bigger, but the whiteboard is only so big, and I don't want to make a video that's 87 hours long. So let's keep going. Biases. Number 14, projecting. We project how we feel onto other people. Like, we assume they feel the way we feel. We assume they care about the issues that we care about. We assume they think the way we think. And then when they don't, we're like, what? How could you not? It's like, okay. We also project our current circumstances onto the past. When we think about the past, we project how we're feeling right now and how we're thinking. You know, it's like when we think about the first few presidents of the United States who were slave owners and they formed the Constitution. All men are created equal and they had slaves. It's like, what? Like, that's so inconsistent based on how we view the world today. We project our current circumstances onto whatever was happening in the 1700s. But of course, back then, you know, things were different. We also project what's going on now into the future. Into the future. This is really important. So when we imagine the future, we imagine that our technology is just going to be the technologies we have now, when in reality, 50 years from now, we're going to have insanely, like, unfathomable technologies. I mean, it's going to be like magic. I don't know what they're going to be, but they're going to be incredible. And oftentimes we forget that, you know, the future is different than the present, and the past was different than the present, and so forth. We have a tendency to project. So that, of course, is a cognitive bias. Recency bias. It's like if you're trying to predict what's going to happen in the 2020 election, which is 3 days away, you know, most people will just go to the most recent election and make a comparison to that one, right? But maybe, you know, Trump, Clinton. But maybe a better comparison is some election that happened in the 1800s. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that that's the case. But it's like if you're trying to, who's going to win the football game tomorrow? You know, do you think the Patriots are going to win their game tomorrow? Well, they were looking good last week, you know, or they didn't look so good last week. You're right. Recency, like what happened most recently, even though that's not necessarily the best comparison. So anyways, availability bias. If we want to like project climate change or like predict climate change or analyze it or somehow, we might want to know, like in a perfect world, I mean, I can't even imagine what I would do if I wanted to study the climate. I might get, I don't know, 10 million thermometers. I don't know, and like spread them all over the world or something like that and upload their data to a server and analyze it for 100 years. Or 1,000 years. I mean, 100 actually is nothing, kind of, on like a planetary scale. 100 years is nothing. But I wouldn't just do that for temperature. I would do that for, I mean, like every metric that science has, right? But I don't have that data, right? I don't have the time. I don't have the energy. Speaking of energy, you know, so I go with what's available, right? I just like Google something. I'm like, what did somebody else do? Oh, he looked at forests in Ecuador and he saw that whatever. Okay, I'll work with that. You know, it's not perfect, but this is the availability bias. And when you're talking about something as big as a planet, you know, it's pretty important to acknowledge the fact that we don't have the data we want. Nobody has it. It's not like it's out there. Someone's holding, like the experts have it and they're just not giving it to us. And they're like, trust me, we know. Nobody has it. Like the data we would actually want would be, I don't know, 100,000 years of data and like 1,000 different data points in each year. I mean, it's like, anyways, availability bias. We work with what we have, even though it's terrible. Social proof. I think the other day, was it Lil Wayne came out and endorsed Trump? It was like, yeah, Trump 2020. Social proof. So I mean, it's so funny that we do that, but that's going to make a lot of people say like, yeah, Trump 2020. I'm in. I like Wheezy. I like Lil Wayne. So I like Trump too. You know, social proof. Like, if I like that celebrity, then I like what that celebrity's doing. Because it's just a mental shortcut. It's like, yeah, other people are doing it. I'm in. It's like halo and horn effect. Like, There's hundreds of these we could talk about. Social proof. So you sort of do something because other people are doing it. Or if you see somebody has like 1 million followers, you're like, oh, I'll follow that person too. Yeah, they must be good. So anyways, like other people are doing it, so will I. Confirmation bias. Once you believe something, you tend to only see data that confirms it. It's really hard. Like if I say to you, there's a lot of red things. There's a lot of red things in your room right now. Like there's a lot of red things. Look around right now. Notice all the red things. Like if you want, pause the video and look around and notice all the red things. Okay? And you might notice like, I don't know, 10, 20 different things that are red. And then if I say, close your eyes and then tell me what in your room is blue. Right? If it's a room you know really well, you're going to be able to say those things. But you might or if I say green or whatever, pick a color, you might realize, oh my gosh, I don't know a single thing in this room that's blue or a single thing that's green. I just have no idea. And the reason you don't know is because once you were primed to look for red, you just immediately delete it. You just like didn't see all the things that were any other color. You just looked for red things in your room. And then if I ask you, well, tell me something that's a different color that's not red, you're like, I don't know. And your brain works the same way when you're scrolling through social media, when you're just on the internet, when you're Googling, And the algorithms don't help, obviously. They feed into this even worse. But once you're primed to believe a certain thing or to look for something or something like that, your brain naturally deletes anything that tells you otherwise. And so once you're aware of this, you really gotta like consciously look for ways of proving yourself wrong. This is what I try to do as much as possible. I say, okay, this is what I believe. Somebody prove me wrong. Like give me evidence to the contrary. I want to, I don't want to be blinded by my own biases. Anyways, next one, confirmation. So this is like social proof. So conformation. You conform to what other people are doing. So social proof is like you do it because you want to be in that group. Like you want to opt into the group, you want to join because other people are doing it. Confirmation bias is like you kind of want to stay in the group. You don't want to be kicked out. So you conform to what the group is doing. It's like if you're with a bunch of friends and they're like, oh, let's go to this restaurant for dinner. Like, oh, man, great food, great atmosphere, great prices, whatever. And then you're sitting there like, great food. Like their food sucks. But like if you're the only one, you don't want to be like, I don't want to be that guy, but their food is actually terrible. So you just kind of like go along with it. You just conform to what the group is doing because you don't want to ruffle any feathers. But oftentimes that leads to like bad decisions, especially when it happens with like, you could imagine a boardroom with like, 8 people and like 7 of them are like, let's go to war. We got to go to war. Like war makes so much sense. And then you're the 8th guy and you're like, actually, that is a terrible idea. But like you don't want to be that guy. Right, then you'll get kicked off the board, but maybe you should speak up, you know what I mean? So a lot of times we keep our mouths shut because we don't want to get kicked out of our group or whatever. Number 20, absence of evidence versus evidence of absence. Okay, it sounds a little like goofy. Really important, actually. Absence of evidence. We don't want to make decisions with an absence of evidence. We don't want to make decisions with an absence of evidence. We want to have evidence of an absence of problems, an absence of side effects. So like if like you saw some pill advertised or something like no evidence of any side effects. Like at first you're like, oh good, no side effects. But if you think about what that's saying, they're saying we have no evidence. We just have no evidence. We didn't even try to measure it. Just you just don't get. There's just no evidence, and so you don't want that. You don't want that. What you actually want is evidence of an absence of side effects. You want to know that they've done so many studies, so many tests, they've taken so many measurements that now they have evidence of an absence of problems. There's no problems. We have so much evidence that there's no problem. I just heard something the other day watching a football game, some NFL game. They were talking about player-to-player transmission of COVID on the field, and they said there's no evidence of player-to-player transmission of COVID on the field, and they like celebrated it. They're like, yeah, it's great, so we're gonna keep playing. And I'm thinking, there's no evidence. Like, that's not a convincing argument at all. But at first glance, you just fall for it. I mean, you're just not ready to pay attention. In reality, it's much stronger if you can say, tons of evidence, no transmissions. Like, we've tested everybody, we whatever. That would be much better. So it's kind of like in the case of climate change, it's like, no evidence that CO2 affects the environment. No evidence. Okay, that's not convincing at all, right? You want to say, like, there's tons of evidence that it's not a problem. That would be more convincing. Now, I don't know which of the two actually applies in this case, but that's what you're going for. Like, you want to have evidence of absence. One other example of that quickly is, like, if you're crossing the street, you don't just walk up to the street and then, like, close your eyes and say, there's no evidence that I'm going to get hit by a car. And then just walk. Like, you don't do that, right? You, like, look both ways and you're like, okay, now I have evidence of an absence of danger. No danger. And now I cross the street, right? So there's a huge difference between the two. Make sure you pay attention to that. 21, correlation versus causation. This one's big. A lot of people mention it all the time. Basically, like, if you see two variables going up, like our energy use skyrocketing over time and temperature in Massachusetts, like in June, like year by year going up or whatever, it doesn't mean that the energy use is causing the temperature change. It also doesn't mean that the temperature change is somehow causing us to use energy, but it could be. Maybe it just is getting hotter for some reason and everyone's running their air conditioner way more than they ever have in the past. So maybe the temperature change is causing the energy use, maybe. Or maybe the energy use is causing the temperature change. Or maybe neither one is causing the other. There's some third variable that's causing both. Like, maybe the sun's just getting hotter or something. Maybe there's just more solar flares. Maybe the nuclear fission or fusion or whatever is intensifying on the sun. I don't know. Maybe the Earth's magnetic field is changing. Who knows, right? There's so many variables we can't possibly know. So anyways, correlation does not imply causation. If you want to know if something causes something from a statistical standpoint, you have to use random assignment. It's the only way to do it. So what you would do is you would split whatever into two groups, basically a control group and a test group, and or treatment group, and you would give the treatment just to one group, and then you would leave the other one alone. So, like, if you want to know if a pill is effective, you get a whole bunch of people, and you give the pill to half of them. You split them up randomly, give the pill to half, and then you don't give the pill to half. Either you give them a placebo, a sugar pill, something. And then you see if there's a difference between the two groups. And if there is, and it's statistically significant, which is a whole different bag of worms, then you can say that there's a causal relationship. So in the case of CO2 and the environment, we don't really have two environments. Like, we don't have two planets, like two Earths that are identical, and we can say, you know what, let's pump out a whole bunch of CO2 on this one, and then let's leave this one alone. If we could, we'd get an answer. But we don't have that luxury. So, like, we're kind of stuck using, like, correlations and modeling, and they're so flawed, every single one of them, for, like, all the reasons I mentioned. Number 22, doomsday, the doomsday bias. Like, doomsday predictions and existential threats tend to get more coverage, more clicks, more interest, more attention. And if you're a news agency, which is a business, right, and you're selling attention, you're selling time, doomsday predictions sell. They just do. Whether you're trying to do it or not, they just naturally work. And if you're a news agency that refuses to put up doomsday predictions, just refuses, there's a good chance you go out of business, right? Because other news agencies will do the doomsday predictions. They're going to get all the attention. They're going to get the clicks. I mean, for better or worse, that's just how it works. So, like, if a friend comes to you and says, like, you shouldn't drink coffee, it might make you pee, you'll be like, whatever, so I pee. And you slurp. But if you say, you shouldn't drink that coffee, it actually could kill you. They're going to be like, what do you mean? Like, kill me? And then maybe you have data, maybe you don't, like, whatever. The whole point is, like, when it's an existential threat or a doomsday thing, people are like, oh, okay, I'll pay attention to that. It makes sense for obvious reasons. Okay, let's finish up here. At the bottom here, I have a a few different arguments or axioms or statements that you may or may not agree with. These are options, and they might help you think through, this argument up here or any others that you hear. So I tend to agree with most of them, but not exactly. And at the end, I'm going to share what's the biggest threat to humanity and the environment, in my opinion. So number 23 here. Our ability to understand, affect, and manipulate nature tends to increase over time. That's a claim. Do you agree? Our ability, and it's really three claims in one, so you can take them separately. Our ability to understand nature tends to increase over time. Our ability to affect nature, and what I mean is like our ability to like invent machinery that burns a ton of energy and produces a lot of CO2 will have a bigger effect. Whereas in the year 1700 or 1200 or 0, that wasn't the case, right? So our ability to affect nature tends to increase over time. And finally, our ability to manipulate nature in like a purposeful way tends to increase over time, where we might like either mitigate things, or we might build like bigger bridges or bigger dams, or we might plant larger forests or remove larger forests or terraform whatever entire mountains, like Mount Rushmore or something. Like, so our ability to manipulate nature tends to increase over time. So you tell me if you agree or disagree. And then of course you can think about the implications, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 60 years from now. Like, what are we going to be able to do to nature in the future? What are we going to understand? Are we going to discover new laws of physics? I'm sure we will. Are we going to be able to, invent like a sort of it sounds so funny. I can't believe I'm going to say it because it's so ridiculous, but like a vacuum cleaner that just like sucks up a bunch of CO2 or something. Like, obviously not in a literal sense, obviously not. But in a metaphorical sense, you have no idea what's possible. I think about the plastic in the oceans, like the giant mounds of plastic, and it breaks my heart. However, I'm so optimistic about humanity and like the creative spirit that I know we are going to invent a way to clean up that plastic really well. I know we are. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm guessing probably like a bacteria or something that just will eat the plastic and then it will secrete oxygen or something, or who knows. But I think we'll be able to solve a lot of these problems really well. Number 24, using energy improves lives. So maybe we could like strengthen that and say like every time we use energy, some life is improved. Do you agree with that or not? Obviously, if you think Bitcoin is a waste, then you would just point to Bitcoin. You'd say, well, Bitcoin is an example of using energy that doesn't improve lives. Okay, if that's the only one, then I think you're kind of full of baloney, right? Come up with some like multiple examples before Bitcoin even existed and so forth. Some example of using energy that doesn't improve a life, and then you can sort of prove that wrong. Number 25, improving lives requires using energy. Do you agree with that? Like, okay, I want to improve my life. What would make my life better? If I lived in a bigger house or something, or if I had more stuff in my refrigerator, if I, didn't have to go to work, or if maybe I could read some extra books, or, go to the gym, or whatever you think would improve your life. If I had air conditioning, or whatever you think would improve your life, does that improvement require energy? I'm willing to bet the answer is yes. Like, it requires your attention, your focus, some form of transportation. Like, you have to walk there, and obviously when you're walking, you're using, human energy, you're consuming calories, fat, protein, carbohydrates, whatever. You're exhaling CO2. So anyways, you tell me if you agree or not. 26, humans are intelligent. Intelligence is a force that maximizes your set of future possibilities. Intelligence is a force that maximizes your set of future possibilities. Very interesting. And I got that definition from a TED Talk that's got to be almost 10 years ago now. I will link to that in the description, a TED Talk on intelligence. There's an interesting equation in there, and I really like the way they describe intelligence. They use, I think artificial intelligence is what they were doing. Some computer programs that essentially exhibited this behavior, and they came up with an equation for it, and they call it like an E equals MC squared moment. Interesting that we're talking about energy. Energy and matter are two sides of the same coin. So anyways, you can watch it. Nature is decentralized. Decentralized systems are self-governing, number one, and decentralized systems are anti-fragile. Anti-fragile, if you don't know, it means that things get stronger as a result of enduring stress. So fragile things might break or be destroyed as a result of stress. Anti-fragile things get stronger as a result of stress. So human beings are anti-fragile individually, but also collectively as a society. I mean, you could companies typically are like it's the idea of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And it applies to certain things, but not to other things. Like if you take a glass and you drop it on the ground, okay, it breaks. That's it. Like end of story. But like if you personally fall off of like I don't know, something 6 feet high or something, it might hurt a little bit, but then you're stronger as a result. You know, your body heals and you get stronger. Okay, number 28. Nature is a complex system. Complex systems are effectively impossible to predict, and they're effectively impossible to control. So if you don't know about complex systems, I encourage you to Google it. They do have some special properties, the way they're defined. It's not just like things that have a lot going on. No, it's not like that. It's not complicated. It's complex. It's a very specific identity. It's a very specific field of science. There's certain criteria that have to be met in order for something to be a complex system, you know, if you subscribe to the same definition. And that includes adaptive behavior, and it also includes emergent properties. So it's kind of like if you think about a human being just made up of atoms, like, you know, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, whatever. Like there's nothing in any individual atom that includes like personhood, but if you put enough of them together, you get a person. And it's like, whoa, that's an emergent property that isn't in the individual pieces, but it emerges from the collection and the way that they're organized. It's absolutely fascinating. So you can go down the rabbit hole of complex systems. But the idea there is if you think nature is a complex system, and it seems pretty obvious to me that it is, they're extremely difficult to predict, extremely difficult to model, extremely difficult to estimate, extremely difficult to control. They're just really, really, really hard things. Poverty is this is sort of a definition. What is poverty? Poverty is a current and potential energy shortage. So poverty, this is how I'm thinking about it. And I'm not saying this is like my favorite definition or anything. It's just one particular way of thinking about it. So like what is poverty? I would say if you have a shortage of energy, basically now and in the immediate future. So like current, like right now, and potential, like, you know, what's your potential for getting energy? I think this is a very interesting way of thinking about it, because keep in mind, food, right, in the form of calories, is energy, right? A calorie is the amount of energy needed to raise 1 liter of water by 1 degree Celsius. So a calorie is a measure of energy. The only reason we eat food is because we need energy, right? And anyways, you know, you can think of money as economic energy, right? You used your energy to do something, right? Your attention, your physical labor, or whatever, you accomplished something, and someone compensated you for it. And like the money you have is the proof of using energy. It's sort of like the proof that you did work. I mean, that's like what money is. It's economic energy. Oh, jeez. So I encourage you to think about it that way. Okay. That's a very interesting way to think about poverty, by the way. Everything is comprised of energy. Thoughts, feelings, objects, processes, etc. Basically anything you can name. So like your ideas, what's your idea? I would argue it's energy. I would argue it's electrical impulses. Your feelings, same thing, right? It's energy. It's chemical energy in the form of chemicals, neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, all these different things flowing through your body. So I would say that's energy. Objects, like we talked about equals MC squared earlier, right? Energy and matter are two sides of the same coin. So like, you know, a microphone is energy. Obviously sound waves are energy. A laptop is energy. A light bulb is energy. A whiteboard is made of energy. Like, not only did energy go into it, but there's energy stored in it. So is everything energy? You know, processes, like, you know, the process of building something is an energetic process, and so forth. So you tell me. Okay, so last. This is an opinion. My opinion here, number 31. What's the biggest threat to humanity and the environment? What do I think it is? Well, it's not Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin is the biggest threat, even if it does become the largest use of energy. I don't think it's going to be the biggest threat. I don't think energy use is the biggest threat to humanity, partly because of some of these things here. I think using energy improves lives. I think if you want to improve lives, you've got to use energy. I think. I mean, there maybe there are examples, exceptions, and if there are exceptions, that's obviously very, very powerful. Then we have to rethink these. But what do I think is the biggest threat to humanity and the environment? I think the biggest threat to humanity and the environment is a combination of ignorance and laziness. I think laziness probably more so. I was prepared to say ignorance. Like when I started recording the video, I was prepared to say ignorance. But it's not so much ignorance, because we can all be ignorant all the time and be aware of it and then work to fix it. The problem, the biggest threat to humanity, is an unwillingness to work on it, which I would call laziness. Like laziness, if I had to define it, it would be poor energy management, like an unwillingness to use energy. That's laziness. I think that's the biggest threat to humanity, particularly laziness in thinking. That would be the first place that I would apply it. My bet is that a decent chunk of this, possibly a majority of this, is new. It's uncharted territory for the majority of people watching this video. That's my bet, is that most of the things I have up here is new for most people. That's what troubles me the most. Not the specific claims or the specific applications, just this way of thinking, just realizing, oh yeah, I have to think about the definitions of all the words I use. Oh yeah, this is what standard form of an argument looks like. Oh yeah, there are all these different cognitive biases, and these two are sort of like logical fallacies, not so much cognitive biases. But it's the fact that those things are new to a lot of people. That's what worries me. That's what worries me. Because I think these things should be at the forefront of everything we talk about as a society. All of our political debates, all of our decisions as a group, local governments, state governments, federal, everything. Like foreign relations. I mean, it's like there's just an unwillingness to exert energy to think through different issues. Like, I mean, you could make your life so much better just thinking through so many of your own beliefs. And the fact that people have not been exposed to so many of these ideas really bother me, and that's why I'm doing a YouTube video on it. That's why I'm doing a YouTube channel. That's why it's somewhat scholarly. Like at one point in the past, I was the executive director, basically a principal of a high school, and I can comment more on that in another video, but. I just think we can do a lot better for the young people in the world, right? Like I don't think there should be an adult on the planet who doesn't know what a cognitive bias is, right? Who doesn't realize that there are trade-offs to everything we do, who doesn't realize that value is subjective. These aren't like difficult concepts, but if you go 20, 30, 40 years without ever hearing it, it's so hard to like wrap your head around this or change everything you've done and rethink all your views and your beliefs in light of this stuff. But to me, it's so basic, it's so fundamental, it's so foundational. So I think that the biggest threat to humanity and the environment is that people aren't willing to think. They just hear like, oh, that politician said that, I believe it. End of story. They're not willing to exert the mental energy. They're not willing to do the proof of work, the thinking, right? The proof of work is a well-structured argument, right? If you haven't come up with a well-structured argument for what you believe, then you haven't done the work, right? You're succumbing to a cognitive bias. You're being lazy. Right, and I don't judge you for it, but my heart breaks knowing that so few people do it and so few people even realize it's an option. Like, you can just think more. That's it. That's the best way to make your world better, is just think more. That's it. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps you. Again, I am very eager to hear what you have to say. I want to hear your comments. I want to hear if you agree or disagree with certain things. I want to hear if something completely was an epiphany for you, if something opened your eyes and you had no idea of something. Share it with me in the comments. If you learned anything at all, give this video a thumbs up. All right. And if you want to see my next video next week, is Bitcoin actually like its white paper? Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks, guys. See you next week.